If you've been following the comments, you may have been as impressed as I was by the response to episode 132. There were threads with dozens of contributions centred on S. Abhishek, covering Tycho Brahe's Earth-centred model of the universe. Many contributors came from some of our regular stars like Menden Kakareya, Technician Biss, Joshua Lemard, Roy Salmons and Tychonian. I want to say many thanks to S. Abhishek for sparking off this very lively discussion. It points to a problem I believe is causing a lot of trouble throughout society at the moment. The problem is that many people still hold to the version of science being practiced today as if it were reliable, and its pronouncements are somehow unchallengeable. Many, if not most, scientists know full well that today's science, which I consider science falsely so called, is definitely not reliable, even though few will admit it. S. Abhishek is absolutely convinced that spacecraft could not perform as they do if Copernicus was wrong. Brahe's model just can't get things right for space travel. Communications just can't work without Einstein. And today's scientists know that's not true. But they don't correct those popular but false stories. They accept Copernicus, but they know full well that everything to do with dynamics works just as well with Tycho Brahe's model. We can see this in an animation from Robert Sungenis. On the left, we see Copernicus's model, with the stationary Sun. On the right, Brahe's model, with the stationary Earth. We see the Sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth and Mars all maintaining the same relative positions. When the Sun, Mercury and Earth line up in one system, they line up in the other. When Earth, Sun, Mercury and Venus align in one, they align in the other. When the Earth, Sun, Mercury and Mars line up in one, they line up in the other. We can see why Hoyle told us the difference is of relative motion only, and there is no significant physical difference. A spacecraft's trajectory would look the same in both cases. Sabine Hossenfelder came across this kind of problem with a paper proclaiming that the scale of the recent fires in Los Angeles was definitely due to man-made carbon dioxide-caused global warming.
I took offense with a study from the World Weather Attribution Center about the LA wildfires from January. They put out a press release which says that, quote, "We find that human-induced warming from burning fossil fuels made the peak January fire weather index 30% more probable," end quote. And they also write that they have, quote, "high confidence that human-induced climate change, primarily driven by the burning of fossil fuels, increased the likelihood of the devastating LA wildfires," end quote. I pointed out that their own analysis doesn't support this claim because their result is statistically insignificant. It's compatible with climate change not having had any effect on the LA wildfires from January this year. Many climate scientists know how sketchy the studies are that come out of this World Weather Attribution Center, but they keep their mouth shut. This study's been online for a month, and no one besides me noticed that the result isn't statistically significant. Seriously? I don't buy this for a second. There are many climate scientists who totally know that their so-called research isn't reliable, but they don't say a word because it'd be politically inconvenient. brilliant. I've seen this happening before. It's how people in the foundations of physics destroyed the reputation of my research area. Whenever there's some crap going around in the media, they look away and keep their mouth shut, thinking all attention is better than no attention. It's one of the reasons why I don't trust scientists. Despite what some people want you to think, I'm not saying this to attract attention. It's much easier. I'm saying this because I really don't trust scientists. And this suspicious silence about crap studies that attract media attention is a good illustration for why. When physicists talk nonsense about dark matter, you could say, well, who really cares? I mean, it's not like someone dies if they mistakenly come to believe that gravitinos exist or whatever. But the question of how to adapt to climate change will affect how many people die in the next wildfires.
Sabina tells us that anyone with any knowledge of statistics reading this paper would see that the results presented showed that the global warming was not statistically significant. But nobody did point it out. So Sabina felt obliged to do so. There are almost no scientists who will point out the disastrous state of today's science, falsely so called. Not only in the field of climate change and man-made global warming, as we saw in episodes 93 and 94, but in every branch of science pushing the Enlightenment's secular worldview. It takes a heroine like Sabina to admit it.
The most visible problems in scientific research are in some sense the least important ones. I mean misconduct and fraud. These cases make a lot of headlines, but they're rare. The second problem with scientific research is far less visible. It's organized scams. These are becoming an increasing problem. These scams include so-called paper mills that are networks of people who sell off paper authorships or citations for money, but also just networks of pseudoscientists who crank out fake papers with fake data and fake images. The methods these people are using are becoming more and more sophisticated and include things like planting fake papers online to generate profiles of imaginary researchers, letting AI write their papers and generating images to try and attract citations by quoting themselves on Wikipedia. This used to be a thing which happened predominantly in some Eastern countries, notably China and India, but it's been spreading west in the past years, with cases showing up in Europe and the Americas. We'll likely see more of this with AI becoming better. And this is a growing problem, but it's not the major problem I worry about, at least not yet. It's, however, indicative of the much bigger problem, because you can ask, and I think you should ask, why do people do this? Why do people buy authorships and citations to pretend being scientists? What's the point? The answer is quite simple. Because it's a good investment. They spend money on fake papers with fake citations, and then they can make more money by using this fake research to get grants or find a well-paid job.
Sabina points to the kind of scientific fraud and deceit that William Broad and Nicholas Wade wrote about more than 40 years ago. That has become ever more common. But she tells us that is now insignificant in comparison to the rapidly growing fraud-making use of technology like the internet. And things are becoming much worse, because AI is getting more and more powerful and better at faking papers than anybody ever could. But those are not her major concern. Could things really get worse for the reliability of science?
The much bigger problem that I'm worried about is then that even if the research isn't outright fake, the incentives still exist and they're still pushing researchers into the wrong direction. That is, economic pressure encourages researchers to publish papers that get cited. And so they develop strategies to make that as simple as possible, which is not by doing good science. The easiest way to publish papers that get cited is to create useless garbage that the public doesn't understand or doesn't care about, and that their colleagues approve of, but that ultimately benefits no one besides scientists themselves. This is the winning strategy. The winning strategy in science is to be useless. Isn't the winning strategy to, make a revolutionary breakthrough? Yes, but to do that, you have to do research in the first place. And where do you get the funding for that? Right. And so scientists come to think of useless paper production as a necessary evil on the way to a breakthrough that never happens, because in the end all they do is produce those useless papers, which of course they'd never admit. Scientists will defend their useless research as allegedly normal, and to be fair, this has been going on for so long that in some sense it has indeed become normal. I've talked to many researchers who know that the topic they work on has no scientific relevance, but who tell themselves and their colleagues that they do it because it pays the bills. And I know many researchers who made up research topics just because there was funding in a particular area. This is why I say it's a planned economy. Most of them would never admit any of this in public. In the literature, it's been called the natural selection of bad science. Basically, the problem is that bad science is easier than real science. So if no one checks the use of the research, the bad science will take over. And that's what we're seeing. I think that most of the people who work in academia don't see anything wrong with what they're doing, because they've been taught that whatever they're doing is standard procedure. Everyone does it, and they can't change it anyway. It's just the system.
Sabina points out that the aim of scientists today is publishing papers. The value or significance of those papers is not very important. But to publish papers, you have to first attract grant money. The long-standing rule of publish or perish has morphed into finance or famine. And that gives a great incentive to work on particular topics, whether they're valuable or worthless. It's far quicker and easier to produce a worthless paper than a meaningful one. It's becoming very difficult to publish a worthwhile paper pointing to weaknesses in any specific field. But in episode 128, we looked at a paper which appeared to buck the trend. It pointed to the collapse of just about all the patches and quick fixes which have kept the Big Bang alive long after it was proved to be false. That seems to suggest that it's not impossible to publish information which shows current theories of astronomy to be wrong. But notice it's published in a special edition of Nuclear Physics, Section B, not in an astronomical journal, where the instructions to the gatekeeping reviewers are probably very different. It's quite likely that it was initially submitted to an astronomical journal, but was refused publication there. So, altogether, it's not really surprising that there are well-meaning people like S. Abhishek who are convinced that science is still what it used to be before the Enlightenment atheistic scientific establishment took over the whole of professional science. Such people think that scientists are still just looking for the truth about the Creator's creation, and there are very few people like Sabina prepared to tell them the truth. He that speaketh truth showeth forth righteousness, but a false witness, deceit. The wisdom of the prudent is to understand his way, but the folly of fools is deceit. Bread of deceit is sweet to a man, but afterwards his mouth shall be filled with gravel. Deliver my soul, O Lord, from lying lips and from a deceitful tongue. Thank you for joining me for this episode. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe and press the bell so that you'll be notified as I release new movies. If you'd like to support this project, you're welcome to do so through Patreon. Find a link on my channel banner and in the description below.